video, I'm going to explain to you why snails are called katatsumuri in Japanese. The reason is because it is impossible for them to katatsu. Ha ha ha. Ha, ha. So I'm actually going to do this, but let me explain why I'm even explaining about this in the first place. Like, why would anyone want to know this or know this? Well, a while back, I stumbled across the reading of tsumuri for the kanji for head. Now, this is not really used anymore, so there's no reason to actually keeping that information in your brain, but my brain immediately went to, oh, okay, so that's why snails are called katatsumuri, because their head is hard. Now, this should tell you two things about my brain. One is that it makes very odd connections, and two, that it actually doesn't work that well either, because the hard part of a snail is not the head, it's the shell. Nevertheless, this got me interested in, hey, is there a relationship here, and why are snails called katatsumuri in Japanese? Now, I am going to convey that information to you. So there are debates over where this word actually comes from, and we don't know 100% for sure what the origin is. But it actually has nothing to do with that tsumuri reading that I showed you earlier. It is not hard head. Instead, first potential origin is from kasa, and this is not the kasa that you know in umbrellas. I did see one source claiming this, but I think what happened there is they heard, oh, katatsumuri comes from kasa, and they misunderstood, because the kasa that most people are referring to are the round hats, which makes more sense when you think about the spiral shell on a snail. This was then either combined with a word like tsubura, which used to mean round, tsuburi, which is now head, and probably linked to that tsumuri I showed you earlier, or buro, which is no longer a word at all. All these terms once referred to shells. So the shared etymology of all these round shell words, the same one as tsubu, which is now used for grain or bead. So all of these are kind of round related in a way. This gave us something like kasatsuburi, which then morphed into katatsuburi, and eventually into katatsumuri, which is what we have now. No, I'm not being lazy by saying somehow. I searched and searched and searched, and the best explanation I got is somehow. If you look in dictionaries, they just say the sound changed, and we'll have to accept that. I'm sure that someone who studies Japanese historical phonology could give a bit more detail on what the exact process was, but it did just kind of happen. Other etymologies are then less popular, but unlike that umbrella one, actually do see some support outside of just one random blog. Some people assume that the kata comes from hard, like I did, with the animal's name therefore being something like hard shell or hard round. In this change, of course, there was no sound change from kasa to kata, which makes the whole thing easier, but that doesn't mean it's actually correct. There's also a even less popular possibility that kata comes from lagoon, because snails like damp, wet places. And even more unlikely, I'm going down in terms of likeliness here for sure, there are people that propose that it comes from the fact that snails kuri, or wave, their katatsuno, which might translate as one horn or literally one eye stalk. Don't blame people thousands of years ago for not biologically dividing things with as much detail as we do today. Most unlikely then is the possibility that snails are called katatsumuri because when rain hits the shell of a snail, it makes a kata-kata sound, and then a tsumuri is a spool, so you have the kata-kata sound plus a spool, which looks like the shell. Personally, I'm not surprised that this is the least commonly supported one. I cannot imagine Japanese people thousands of years ago sitting around being like, what do we name that bug? Well, wait, let's wait till the rain hits it and base the name off that sound. But stranger things have happened in the history of languages, so basically I'm just the messenger here. I'm reporting to you what I found. And if you want to believe it, well, it's not the most harmful fake information that you could take on board. To wrap up though, of course, we also have to talk about how to spell snail. This is a bit of a simpler discussion, but as a native Japanese word, katatsumuri just existed, and the Japanese people had to pick the kanji that was going to be used for it. And if you haven't seen it, it's this. The version of this into Japanese is pretty simple. This is the kanji that are used to write snail in Chinese, so Japanese people just said, okay, we'll take that and give it a different pronunciation. And the rest is history. Why did Chinese people use these two kanji? Well, the first one there, pretty simple to explain. The radical on the left means bug or creature. It's used for snakes and stuff too. And the one on the right comes from whirlpool. So it's telling you that, hey, this is a bug that relates to kind of a whirlpool in some way, which is, of course, linking to the shell. The other kanji, though, is for a cow. Snails are, and I don't mean to shock you, but not cows. So why are they called vortex insect cows? Well, no one knows for sure, but the most prominent story is that someone a long time ago thought that the eye stalks on the snail kind of looked like the horns on a cow, and so they just said, yeah, why not? And hey, now we gotta do that. Indeed, because of this though, you can actually call snails in Japanese kagyu in theory, although no Japanese person that I spoke to in preparing this video has ever heard that ever been done. But it's in the dictionary, so this means at least one Japanese person in the history of time has done so. As you can also see in that definition though, this can be used to refer to the cochlea in your ear, and that's just because it kind of looks like a snail, which, fair enough. Finally though, before I completely finish off this video, I should also note that snails in Japanese can be called denden mushi and mai mai. Just like katatsumuri, we're not 100% sure why, but The major theories behind these are pretty interesting, so let's just put them out there. Both of these are thought to exist because these are things that children yelled at snails. I know that sounds silly, it sounds as silly as the rain dripping thing, but there are citations for this. Den den mushi comes from children yelling at the snails to come out of their shells using den or deo depending on your source. Again, an older way of just saying get out, come out. And mai mai apparently comes from children yelling at the snails to dance, which is strange, but if I was a bored Japanese kid 2,000 years ago, I might have thought this was a great way to spend my time. Who knows? This leaves us with a bunch of mystery and, indeed, the question of whether it's even worth knowing all of these stories. But this isn't called useful information lecture, it's called useless information lecture. And while snails may never gain the ability to katateru, at the very least all these potential etymologies have given you the ability to katareru about katatsumuri. See you next time.